This started as a New Yorker article that you wrote, right? In 2000, was it 6? I think it was 2006.
Right. Yeah. It was. It came about the way a lot of stories do, which was just pure accident. I knew nothing or had no reason to know anything about pigeons, but I was out walking my dog one day, and there was a 12-year-old girl, 13-year-old girl walking her dog, so we were chatting, and her dog was herding the pigeons in the park. And I said to her, "Oh, your dog must get very sad when you get home and he doesn't have pigeons to herd." And she said, "Well, no, actually, I raise pigeons, so he's got pigeons at home." And I said, "What?" I didn't know that this was still an ongoing hobby, but I also, the little I knew about pigeons and pigeon racing did not include 13-year-old girls. It was a sport largely done by middle-aged men in their undershirts on the rooftop in Brooklyn. So I just said, "Can I talk to you?" I just thought this is an amazing story. And then it turned out, again, just through the accident of timing, that her mom had decided to sell their house and move, which raised all sorts of questions about what she was going to be able to do with her pigeons, because if you have a homing pigeon and you move to a new home and you let the pigeon out to go do its exercise and go for a fly, it will go back to your old house. So whoever you sold your house to will suddenly have pigeons there waiting to be fed. So the poignancy of her losing her home and against the sort of reality of pigeons not being able to leave their home seemed just like an ideal subject for a story.
Yeah. So then, how does this become a script then? Who initiated? Did you, John, initiate turning into screenplay?
So, yeah. So Susan Orlean, I mean, widely recognized as one of the greatest living American writers, journalists, novelists, however you want to put it, is famous in my world. I'm a screenwriter for writing stuff that's really difficult to adapt. Right? So she writes this incredible novel called The Orchid Thief, based on all this insane research, and this great writer takes it on, Charlie Kaufman, and he basically writes a movie about how hard it is to adapt this Susan Orlean piece. So
I was put on Earth to really irritate screenwriters.
And you are excelling. No, and then what happens is I'd been working for DreamWorks for a bit, and I had written and directed a movie for them, and Steven Spielberg really liked it, and then he reads the piece in the New Yorker and says, I want to talk to him about it. So he calls me. No, he calls my agent, obviously, or someone who works for him calls somebody who represents me and says he wants to talk to you about this article. So I go and I have this lovely meeting with him, and it's this incredible article. It's this piece that's so lyrical, it's so interesting, but I'm like, what is the movie? So I kind of got forced by them to try to adapt this into a screenplay. So I got to go to Boston and meet the young gal that Susan had met and her mom. And I just kind of started, and then Susan and I hung out a bit. I went and visited with her, and we talked about pigeons. She did all this pigeon research. I kind of started to do all this pigeon research, and then I just kind of just came up with what would be a situation for a young gal and what would she be up against. And this young gal in her life had gone through a divorce and, moving and those kind of things, which were kind of traumatic for her. So that all kind of found its way into the kind of the quilt of the story.
Dean and Naomi, at what point did the two of you get involved?
John and I made Power Rangers together.
Okay.
And after that, as I sort of said in the introduction, John called me and said, do I want to read the script? And I did. and I fell in love with the movie. But it was unclear really how we were going to get it made. And it was at Paramount, because when Paramount and DreamWorks split up, Paramount had paid for all the development and the rights, etc. So Paramount had it now. And we tried to get it made at Paramount Players that no longer exists, and then it sort of went away, and then it came back a few times. And finally, weirdly, I was working at DreamWorks Animation, and I got a phone call from Paramount with Shauna Phelan called me, and I'd been working for Shauna for a while making some TV shows. And she called me and she said, well, at that point we had attached Brian Cox. So Brian read the script, he loved the script, I think because of he had been in adaptation, and he and Susan had become friends, and he saw Susan's name.
That's right.
Right, so he plays Robert McKee in
He was
adaptation.
Robert McKee.
Yes.
I didn't put that together.
So anyway, so Brian had, what had become exciting is that Brian had read the script, he loved the script, and he was attaching himself to the movie. And that obviously kind of gave this whole sort of, it just poured gasoline on this fire that was kind of still burning. And I got a call from Shauna, and she said, Dean, there's a window. Brian has a window. And if you can you prep the movie in 7 weeks? Because if you can, you'll leave on Monday and we'll greenlight the movie. And I had no idea if we could prep the movie in 7 weeks. But I knew that I had to say yes. So I just said yes on the phone. I said, oh, of course, yes, of course we can prep it in 7 weeks. It's no problem. I've been thinking about it, and 7 weeks is fine, and this is why. And I just made it up. And I did have a feeling we would get more time, which we did. We got 8 weeks. But what's so crazy about that is that the movie was in development for 17 years and was greenlit in 3 days. It's crazy. And so then we packed up and we flew to Portland.
I hear a lot of stories like this. I have a feeling this is the way all of everything works.
I guess. It was on this
Is it
one.
languishes for years and years and years, and then within 3 days, it's
Right, all the stars sort of have to
getting
align.
made.
And then Naomi and I met. You can tell that story.
Well, it was funny for me because I do mostly independent films where I'm always saying to everybody, it could take 2 years, it could take 20 years. One way or another, we'll figure it out, we'll get the movie made. And for me, a lot of the times it definitely takes, many years to get the movie. I work on, some of the movies I work on are quite challenging. And so this was a rare instance in my life where I got a call from John Gatins, who's like, I have a movie that might be happening, and like really quickly, is there any universe where you might be available? Could you meet the director? And I was like, oh, sure, send me the script. And like everybody on this movie fell in love with the script. What John didn't know when he called me, we're just old friends, and I think felt like it could use an independent producer who wouldn't be afraid of a 7 week prep, which for me, I'm like, oh, that's 2 more weeks than I usually get. I'm no problem. And so he had that instinct. And then the funny thing is it lands on my desk, and it's like based on the article by Susan Orlean, and Susan and I are friends, as it turns out. So I was a bit of kismet. Then I met with Dean. It was like a shotgun marriage. We met for about an hour and a half, and I think we were both like, okay, I like you. And Dean's like,
I'm leaving on
like
Monday.
Her. And then literally the next time we saw each other was at the airport on our way up to Portland where we shot the movie. So, and then obviously we worked very closely together and very intensely for those 8 weeks of prep. But it was very, very intense. I mean, we hadn't fully cast them. We hadn't even picked the lead, who's obviously amazing and so much the heart of the movie. But
so talk about Brooklyn, who a lot of people know from Florida Project, right?
Yeah.
Talk about working with Brooklyn on this. How did you know that? Was she one of your top candidates from the beginning of who you wanted to be the lead in this?
Well, I mean, everything sort of kind of aligned on this, I think, in these random, weird ways where the film gods, I think, were smiling on us. I decided to go with my wife, who was one of the producers of Cocaine Bear, to the premiere of Cocaine Bear. And Brooklyn is in Cocaine Bear, obviously a very different movie. And we're at the after party, and my wife said to me, "You have to audition Brooklyn for your movie." And we had gone through a long process of casting at that point, and we were very close to picking the lead. And casting is one of those things that's just so hard, in my experience, for everyone to align on. And we were all so close, and we were all kind of in agreement. And the studio and me and the producers, and it just felt like that's something I don't need to worry about. And I said to my wife, we're so close. The ship has sailed. We're so close. We love this other girl. It's going to be this other girl. And my wife wouldn't stop. And then she got Brooklyn's agent to come over to me and talk about Brooklyn. I was like, I love Brooklyn. I was like, okay, fine. Just you email the casting directors and we'll audition Brooklyn. And thank God we did, because the other kids were amazing. But Brooklyn had something that we hadn't quite seen and captured the spirit of the character in this whole other way that I think was more mature than we had honestly been looking at. And so much credit to Brooklyn. She not only won the role, she beat out frontrunners who we were all ready to commit to. So that's how she got cast.
I really loved her co-star Che Tafari.
Yeah.
Was it hard to find
Very
Che?
hard. Really, really hard. And that was just, we looked at hundreds of tapes and brought in, maybe 20 boys and did mix and matches. And
he was so funny.
he's so good.
And I just found the mix of those two together. They just played, they had different energies, and they played really well off of each other. And also just, the fact of him obviously being in love with her, and I loved it.
I felt that in the room with the two of them. When we auditioned the two of them, I sort of felt that there was this connection that they had. They were listening to each other. They were playing off each other. There was a chemistry there that no other of our pairings really kind of had in a genuine way, and they became genuinely best friends. And I think you can see that on screen.
So I'm going to throw a wild card question in here. There's no right or wrong answer, okay? When I watch movies, I automatically compare what I'm watching to everything else that I've ever seen in my entire life, even if it was way back when I was 8 years old. And so after I saw this, I immediately started thinking of all the divorce movies I've ever seen. And the first one that pops into my head is Kramer versus Kramer, which came out when I was a kid. And that movie was kind of marketed like a horror movie, where it was so serious, the way that movie was presented. And I'm just wondering if any or all of you have an opinion on how divorce narratives and divorce films have changed. Because we have Kramer versus Kramer, which was kind of like divorce is the devil and nobody should do it. And then and now do you think that this has changed? We're in a place where we're just you know what? Divorce is very hard on families, and we really need to talk about this.
I would say that the what's changed is that there's just a lot more openness about it, and kids are in a space where they can articulate their feelings about it a lot more, both amongst their friends and also to their parents. And I think also telling a story like this that's really rooted in the perspective of a kid is not something that I feel like we've seen a ton of before. I mean, even when you go back and you watch, E.T., I mean, that's a divorce story, and the mom is really struggling, and I think, but you're not necessarily tracking the full emotional impact of that on the kids. And I think now we're in a space where not only that's possible, but I think it's also really important.
Yeah.
And I think for all of us, as we were stepping into this space to make the film, we really felt like we want to meet the kids where they're at. And it's been very interesting to show the film actually to the kids of that age and also the parents of kids of that age.
Yeah.
There's so much gratitude for making a film that really addresses this issue, you know, honestly, and treats the kids not like little kids who are just, you know, the sideshow, but are really, you know, at the center of the story. And so that was very important for us, you know.
Thank
But we
you so
did
much.
talk about those films, and actually I think all of us were like, wow, like we're getting to make a movie that nobody gets to make anymore.
Right.
That where you have like real issues facing kids, and you deal with that in a really kind of like honest, respectful way that has real gravitas, you know.
Right.
It's not, you know, this is not euphoric. We're not like exploiting or, you know, whatever, you know. But it's also not something that's just like a feel-good film. We're dealing with real issues that have real impact
Right.
on kids.
Yeah, I feel like that was around quite a bit in the 1980s too, that kind of old young pairing, like Karate Kid, or those movies where like it's a kid and an adult, some adult, and they just freaking hate each other and they don't want to be together, but then, you know, it turns out perfect.
Yeah, definitely. I think some of our favorite movies are those movies.
Yeah. I totally forgot that E.T.
I have to add that when I had this meeting with Steven, we were talking about I had made this movie Dreamer with Dakota Fanning, and then he immediately took her to make War of the Worlds. So by me sitting down with him, we were talking about those two movies, and he was like, they're both movies about 9/11, aren't they? And we kind of had this really trippy conversation about what inspired me to make that movie, what inspired him to make that movie, and it came out of that same moment and those kind of things. And when we started talking about this story, he started talking about E.T., and he said, that movie is about my parents' divorce. So that's like, you know.
Well, in fact, I mean, part of why I was so drawn to write the story was I might have met a girl who had an odd hobby, and that might have been a very interesting story in and of itself. But this had another layer, and it was challenging. I mean, and you know, I think you capture it in the film quite well. I mean, her dad really was absent, and you know, her relationship with her father was really strained, and I think coupling these things together felt like that's a better way to tell a story than just here's a sort of odd hobby and a cute kid, because nothing exists in that vacuum. There's always more. And I think, you know, sometimes people who get very caught up in a hobby or a pastime, it's often because there's something else going on in their life that hurts. And I think that comes through in the movie very well.
Right, absolutely. Well, and that's why Brian Cox is in it too, you know, which we don't find out till later, but he's ill and he's hanging on to the last, he's in his last days.
Susan, you have to share about.
Yeah, well, this is interesting. I did spend a lot of time in the course of working on the story with a guy who was a passionate pigeon fancier, and he let me know fairly early on in our time together, and we spent a lot of time together, that he had cancer and it had metastasized through his body, and it was sort of the beginning of the end. And his wife was really annoyed with him because she wanted to go somewhere nice and spend their last days, you know, somewhere warm, and he refused to leave his pigeons. Anyway, the story got optioned immediately, and then we entered the long winter of development or lack of development. And every year or so, he would check in with me and say, you know, is the movie ever going to happen? And without saying it explicitly, I think he was saying, you know, I'd sure love to see this before I kick the bucket. And, you know, year after year, and it was still sort of in the nether reaches of development, and I kind of thought, oh God, I don't know what to tell him. I think he's not going to be around to see the movie. Anyway, when we got again to this brink of everything happening and everybody's life rights had to be re-upped, lo and behold, his cancer had gone into remission. 17 years since I met him, and he's gotten to see the movie.
That's
and
amazing.
It was one of the few times where I just kept hoping, please get this made. I know how much it would mean to him, and even better that his own health is rather magically improved. It's
Yeah.
pretty amazing.
Well, thank you for that story. We're gonna, I think, wrap up with that. That was a perfect wrap up. Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you so much for your coming
Thank you for having us.
for Q&A
Thank
tonight.
you, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.